In the early 1960s, Boston was a city on the cusp of change, but beneath its veneer of historic charm lay a terror that would grip the nation. A series of brutal murders began, targeting vulnerable women, shattering the peace and security of quiet neighborhoods. This wasn't just a crime wave. It was the birth of a legend, the chilling case of the Boston Strangler. The nightmare began on June 14, 1962. Anna Sleezers, a 55-year-old nurse, was found dead in her third-floor apartment in Boston's West End. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled with the cord of her own dressing gown. Her body was meticulously posed, a detail that would become a haunting signature. Less than 2 weeks later, on June 28, 1962, Mary Mullen, 85, was found dead in her apartment in Boston's South End. Like Sleezers, she was strangled, in her case with her own stockings, and sexually assaulted. The killer had meticulously arranged her body, mirroring the unsettling ritual of the first crime. The pattern was terrifyingly clear. Elderly, single women, living alone, sexually assaulted and strangled, often with their own clothing. The meticulous staging of the bodies suggested a ritualistic element, a disturbing signature left by an unknown assailant. Boston's police department quickly realized they were dealing with something far more sinister than isolated incidents. By August, the body count had risen. Helen Blake, 65, was found in her apartment on August 19th, strangled with stockings. Then, Ida Erga, 60, discovered August 30th. Each victim added another layer of fear, another unanswered question. The city watched in disbelief as the number of women targeted continued to grow. Police initially struggled to connect the dots. The crimes occurred in different neighborhoods, sometimes across town, making a unified investigation challenging. The lack of forced entry in many cases suggested the women might have known their killer or perhaps unsuspectingly let him in. This heightened the sense of betrayal and vulnerability. The media, initially cautious, soon dubbed the perpetrator the Boston Strangler, a name that would forever evoke terror. Local newspapers ran increasingly frantic headlines, detailing the rising death toll and the authorities' inability to catch the killer. Public fear transformed into outright panic. Women began to take unprecedented precautions. Locks were reinforced, doors double-bolted, and women feared answering their own doors. Social outings ceased, and a profound sense of isolation and suspicion permeated daily life. Every unfamiliar face became a potential threat. Every creak of the floorboards a harbinger of doom. The pressure on law enforcement mounted exponentially. Attorney General Edward W. Brooke personally took charge, creating a special task force. This interdepartmental team was designed to coordinate efforts, pool resources, and bring an end to the terrifying spree that was paralyzing the city. The stakes were incredibly high. Thousands of tips poured in, overwhelming investigators, but yielding no concrete leads. False alarms and mistaken identities further complicated the already challenging investigation. The Strangler seemed to vanish into thin air after each attack, leaving only despair and profound questions in his wake. The victims' families grappled with unimaginable grief, compounded by the horrifying nature of the crimes and the elusive killer. They demanded answers, justice for their loved ones, but the silence from police only deepened their anguish. The killer continued to evade capture, his identity a chilling mystery. As summer turned to autumn in 1962, the attacks continued, growing bolder, more frequent. The killer's impunity seemed to mock the police, leaving Boston in a state of perpetual fear. The city held its breath, wondering who would be next, and why the killer always targeted the vulnerable, leaving behind a wake of terror and countless unanswered questions. The terror that began with older women living alone soon took a chilling turn. The profile of the victims expanded, suggesting an evolving, more brazen killer. The stakes were raised, and the city's sense of safety eroded further, as the Strangler's hunting grounds seemed to expand without warning. September 1962 brought a brutal escalation. Patricia Bissett, 23, was found strangled in her apartment, a scarf her weapon. Then, Beverly Simmons, 23, was found on September 27th. Both were younger, suggesting a shift from the previous victimology. The methods remained similar, but the targets diversified, deepening the mystery. The crimes were no longer confined to isolated apartments. Some victims lived in occupied buildings, increasing the audacity of the killer. The police were baffled by the lack of witnesses despite the killer's increasingly bold approach. It was as if he could melt into the shadows, a ghost moving through Boston streets. The forensic science of the 1960s was rudimentary compared to today. DNA profiling was decades away. Investigators relied heavily on fingerprints, eyewitness accounts, and trace evidence like fibers or hairs. These limitations severely hampered the investigation, leaving vital clues unanalyzed and connections unmade. The FBI was called in, adding their resources and expertise to the task force. Agent John E. Douglas, a pioneer in criminal profiling, would later reflect on the case. Yet, even with federal assistance, the perpetrator remained a phantom, leaving no clear trail or discernible motive beyond the acts themselves. The pressure on Attorney General Brooke was immense. He faced public criticism for the lack of progress and the seemingly endless string of murders. Citizens demanded answers, accountability, and most importantly, an end to the reign of terror that had engulfed their city. The political fallout was palpable. Numerous suspects were brought in for questioning, their descriptions often conflicting and vague. Some witnesses described a man with a charming demeanor, others a more menacing presence. The lack of a consistent composite sketch made the search for a specific individual almost impossible. The case became a national sensation, captivating and terrifying Americans across the country. The Strangler was a boogeyman, a real-life horror story playing out in the news. Books and films would later be inspired by the gruesome events, etching the Boston Strangler into the annals of true crime. By the end of 1962, the official victim count stood at 9, with several other suspicious deaths also being investigated. 11 to 13 victims eventually linked to the Strangler over nearly 2 years. Each one a stark reminder of the killer's unchecked savagery and the city's paralyzing fear. The investigators worked tirelessly, pursuing every lead, no matter how remote. They interviewed thousands of people, collected countless pieces of evidence, but the elusive nature of the perpetrator continued to defy their efforts. The killer was always one step ahead, always out of reach. The psychological toll on the city was immense. People lived in a constant state of anxiety, afraid of shadows, afraid of strangers, afraid of their own homes. The once vibrant city was stifled by collective dread, a testament to the power of an unseen enemy. As the calendar turned to 1963, then 1964, the Boston Strangler remained at large. The search continued, the fear lingered, and the city desperately longed for answers. Despite intense efforts and thousands of tips, the killer remained elusive, leaving a trail of terror that seemed to mock law enforcement at every turn. Just when the case seemed destined for eternal coldness, a new, unexpected lead emerged from an entirely different investigation. This turn of events would bring forward a man who claimed to be the Boston Strangler, plunging the already complex case into an even deeper quagmire of confusion and conflicting truths. In October 1964, Albert DeSalvo, a handyman with a history of sexual offenses, was arrested for a series of break-ins and assaults, earning him the moniker the Green Man, or the Measuring Man. He would gain entry to women's homes under the guise of repair work, then assault them. While incarcerated for these Measuring Man crimes, DeSalvo confessed to fellow inmate George Nasser that he was the Boston Strangler. Nasser, a notorious informant, passed this information to his attorney, F. Lee Bailey, who then informed the authorities. The confession sent shockwaves through the legal and investigative communities. DeSalvo's confession was disturbingly detailed, recounting specific aspects of the crime scenes that were not public knowledge. He described how he entered apartments, the types of ligatures used, and even the positions of the bodies. These details provided compelling evidence that he was indeed the killer. However, DeSalvo almost immediately recanted parts of his confession, then later reconfessed, adding layers of doubt to his claims. Was he seeking notoriety? Was he delusional? Or was he truly the Strangler, grappling with the weight of his own monstrous deeds? The answers remained elusive.